Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Kampfner, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to The Revolution. Now, 5 years ago, I set up in the UK a body that was designed to bring together all the creative industries and all the arts under one umbrella. The aim was first to do it in one country, and then to do it around the world in terms of collaboration. But most importantly, it was about getting the creative sector involved in politics and in society and in changing the world for the better. And a year ago, by coincidence, first in Paris and then in Montreal, I met the amazing, who you will hear from later, Holger Volland, here from the Buchmesse. And we were talking about the whole question of collaborations. And he said, why don't I collaborate here because of the great project, the Arts Plus project, which is underway, and this new program, Create Your Revolution. So that is the theme of our fabulous evening of discussions tonight. And I hope you will stay with us and participate in all of that. Just very quickly, some housekeeping points. Those of you sitting here in the front, I've been told to tell you that you cannot leave because we are filming. Arte is filming tonight, and this is being live streamed by the Buchmesse's Facebook page. So if you do need to disappear, you better do it now, otherwise you have to stay until the interval. But please do interact with us. Go on Twitter, #CreateYourRevolution. Please put your mobiles on silent, but do tweet away, because we want to hear from you. Now, I am only the small part in this. We have, as our co-moderator tonight, a presenter who you may well have seen on the brilliant Franco-German arts station, Arte, and Arte are partners here of Arts Plus. So please welcome, give a huge welcome to my co-moderator, Nazan Gökdemir.
Thank you very much, John. Ja, herzlich willkommen auch wirklich von mir. Also, without culture, there is no future. And that's exactly the reason why the Frankfurter Buchmesse launched this year the global campaign, Create Your Revolution. And today we come together to celebrate this highlight event. And the good news is that the global campaign does not stop with this evening. It will continue. After the book fair and throughout next year, there will be many, many events taking place to celebrate the change makers here across the world. As part of the campaign, artists and activists have sat down for video interviews. And I met some of them. Perhaps you already saw some videos. For instance, the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei, or the German pianist Igor Levit, or the German climate activist Luisa Neubauer. And during these Talk Your Revolution talks, I asked them different questions, but one question was always the same. What is the role, what is the responsibility of culture? And all of them, they said, culture is the backbone of society. It gives us orientation and the sense of belonging. With us is Jürgen Boos, director of the Frankfurter Buchmesse, and Jürgen, with last year's campaign on the same page, Frankfurter Buchmesse called on the international book and media industries to become actively involved in ensuring respect for human rights. So tell us, what is Create Your Revolution about then?
Actually, we're getting even deeper. Last year we asked for institutions for help, we asked politicians, and we've seen that we are living now in even more complicated times than last year. So politics failed, trade agreements failed, countries shut their borders. So we thought, what is left? It's our personal responsibility. And what is our core? It's our culture, it's our identity, it's our language, it's our storytelling. So we thought we have to put this into focus, and it cannot stop during this book fair. We have to move on with it.
But why does culture matters? Why it's more important than ever? Why culture?
Because, as I said before, it's about us ourselves. It's about our personal responsibility. Because we cannot leave it to institutions anymore. When politics fails, it has to be us. And the core of a human being, it's this culture. It's this cultural understanding. It's the acceptance of other people. And the most important thing is to listen to other people. Not talk, but listen.
As I said, the campaign does not end with this evening. It will continue. So what is your vision for the future?
No, we actually have to look into other partners. We have wonderful partners. We have TV partners. We have media partners. Now we need a lot more people getting involved as well, playing around with us. This is also a laboratory. We have to experiment. We have to, what you're doing the next hours actually is this experiment, bringing together ideas which bond us and which leave us open to other voices.
I'm looking forward. Thank you very much, Jürgen. We are leaving the stage. I'll hand over to John and see us in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jürgen, and what a great start to this evening. It is, as he says, this is the start of something we hope will be fantastic and something long-standing, not for the sake of the Buchmesse, but very much for the sake of what Jürgen and Holger and their teams are trying to do, to use culture to improve society and to play a part in all the big questions that face the world. Now, our next guest, Hotfoot from Los Angeles on the west coast of the US, is just such a person. She comes from an artistic family, but a family that is absolutely rooted in activism. And she herself is just that person as well. So she has been right at the heart of all kinds of activism movements, leading the feminist movement. She's on the board of 4freedoms.org, which is the 4 freedoms against restrictions on speech, worship, work, want, and fear. She's the executive director of Sankofa, which she will explain much more about. And she is the personification of what we wish to be, which is activism and culture working close together. Please give a warm welcome to Gina Belafonte.
Thank you. I would like to first of all honor the ancestors and those who have come before us, those who pave a way for us to be here today. I would like to acknowledge all directions, north, east, south, and west, up and down, inside and out, and all that has created us. Thank you to Elizabeth Stengel and to the Frankfurt Book Fair for giving me this opportunity. I am honored. To those who have come from near or far, welcome. And to all those who are here to assist us and to serve us, thank you. I believe in incorporating spiritual and cultural practice in creative ways, not only to preserve other cultures' practices, but to create new ones. I would like for us all here today to take a collective breath to solidify this moment. We are all gathered here, and this moment will never be again. So on the count of 3, let us all inhale. 1, 2, 3, inhale, and exhale. And let's do that one more time. 1, 2, 3, inhale, And exhale. Woo! I can feel the energy. Storytelling is a treasured form of communication. Families used to sit around the fire or dinner tables and tell stories. The elders would pass down traditions through stories. Rarely do we sit around in circle and tell stories anymore. Media, especially television, acts as powerful agents of socialization that define how the world works and our place in it. Where books used to, in our culture, media consumption has become an essential part of our daily lives. Though people might say they know the difference between reality and entertainment, research shows that media socialization often happens in subtle and covert ways. What you see on television or in film often becomes a part of your memory, and thus a part of your life experience. I think this is why so many young people gravitate instinctively to tell their stories on social media. I will today, however, take the advantage of this forum to read a bit of the unwritten book of my life. My household was full of dyslexics. It was full of storytellers. So while books were revered, and we had many of them, we were encouraged to read them, but they terrified me. I come from a mixed bag of goods. My mother, a Russian-Lithuanian Jew, born on the Lower West Side of New York, and my father of Caribbean descent, whose mother was a devout Catholic. I remember as a child searching for identity, exploring all the options my ancestors had offered. My father was born into poverty in Harlem, New York, and raised between there and the island of Jamaica. He remembers his mom dragging him from the front stoops of Harlem brownstones, where he would hear the stories from Marcus Garvey, a fellow Jamaican from St. Anne's Parish, where his mother was born, W.E.B. Du Bois and Paul Robeson, whom he would later meet and became his mentors. He remembers getting his political orientation from these stories and his mom's ongoing search for truth and knowledge. My mother grew up in a very progressive household in the West Village of New York. Her father, a descendant of Russian communist Jews, and her mother, who was disowned from her conservative Orthodox family when she chose my grandfather as her mate. My grandmother was way ahead of her time, an illustrator and a painter. My mother and my father were both high school dropouts. And my mother became the only white-skinned member of an all-black dance company, the Catherine Dunham Company, in the 1940s and 50s. This was a very volatile time in the United States and the world as it related to race. To be integrated in that reverse segregation was a unique experience. She tells me the story of when Catherine Dunham choreographed a very political ballet for her to star in. Southland was its name. She was to play a white woman who has an affair with a black man, and when her white husband finds out, he forces her to convict her lover of rape so he will be lynched. Now, we know that for most part, aside from music or percussion, dance is usually silent. In this ballet, Dunham had my mother's character yell in the middle of a court scene, "Nigger," at her lover. This was a bold statement from Miss Dunham and a terrifying directive for my mother. The power of the word. Many of her company mates at that time began to think and wonder, does she really mean it? This was tough for my mother. What great courage it took for her to yell this word. Years later, when my brother was born, he older than I, my parents were denied housing in New York because they were a mixed-race couple. She would receive letters to the hospital saying, "Congratulations on your nigger baby." You can only imagine the horror of a young mother to receive that kind of message. Later, my parents would have the good fortune to buy an entire building in New York City and turn it into cooperative apartments so as to have ownership of their home and growing family. Growing up in my home, I sat on the laps and at the knees of some of the greatest artists and civil rights leaders of the 20th century. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Coretta Scott King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Odetta, Marlon Brando, Diane Carroll, James Baldwin, and so many more. It is important to say their names. I remember keeping as quiet as possible to remain the fly on the wall as many discussions, stories, and strategies were delivered and organized from my home. It was a safe haven for many civil rights workers of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and SCLC, Dr. King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. My father is best known for his performing arts career in film and music, and some know him for his humanitarian work. What we often forget is how he used art as a tool for social change, even when his audiences didn't know it. Every time he introduced a new artist to share his platform, Miriam Makeba, Hugh Masekela, Nana Muscuri, Letta Mbulu, Diane Reeves, and the list goes on. He was opening the hearts and minds of so many of his fans who had never heard the sounds of those foreign tongues. He began infusing the idea of a whole new category and genre of music, world music. My parents are storytellers, whether through dance or through music and film. They brought many untold stories to new audiences around the world. As a child, I remember how I felt anytime I entered into a theater. It was magic. It was inspiring. For me, I began to see the theater as a kind of temple, a sacred space. As often as our parents would tell us stories of their experiences in theaters, entering into this temple of imagination never got tired or old. It just became more and more magnificent. No matter how big or elaborate or dusty or run down, the theater has never waned. And to have the rarefied perspective and intimacy of an up-close and personal connection to one of the most celebrated artists of his time, backstage during a Belafonte performance had its exceptional perks, as you can imagine. Whether it was Carnegie Hall, the O'Keeffe in Toronto, the Olympia in Paris, the National Theatre of Japan, a stadium here in Germany, or the Greek Theatre in Los Angeles, my father graced the stages of the world with grace. He taught us that the stage is a platform to educate, motivate, and activate audiences to a deeper understanding of empathy, to raise awareness to specific issues of the day, and to introduce audiences to sights and sounds they have never seen nor heard. I was in awe of his unique ability to capture an audience, his majesty, the confidence he had in his material. His strategy and pacing were unique and unparalleled. Witnessing his command of the stage from the wings was one of my most favorite things to do. other than, of course, being on the stage myself. Each night I would watch my father prepare to go on stage, how he would speak and motivate and inspire his band and singers and crew before the show. And once the curtain went up and he stepped out onto that stage, the magic in that first moment was breathtaking. He would walk out, or should I say he would swagger out to center stage and take a deep bow. He would sing up to 5 songs sometimes before speaking to the audience. And by then, he had them right where he wanted them, right in the palm of his hand. So no matter what he said, the audience would just gaze in agreement like they were under a spell. Rarely would he give me any kind of notice before he stepped out, as he was in deep preparation and concentration. But on occasion, he would see me in the wings, singing and dancing, and would wink or smile to let me know he saw me. I am one of the very lucky ones who not only got to witness greatness, but also the power of the theater, the power of live entertainment, the power of the arts, the power of process, the power of storytelling, and the power of a genius at work. I have many stories of my childhood, amazing memories and cooking recipes. Perhaps one day I will sit down and actually write a book about all that I have witnessed and heard. It is important for each of us and each generation to write and tell their stories and carry on the legacies of our collective history. We are all interconnected, and our individual well-being is inextricably linked to the well-being of the other. Dr. King said, "Something must happen so as to touch the hearts and souls of men and women, that they will come together, not because the law says it, but because it is natural and right." In other words, our ultimate goal is genuine intergroup and interpersonal living. Only through nonviolence can this goal be attained. And I feel only through the arts can we attain this goal. As Paul Robeson said, "Artists are the gatekeepers of truth. We are civilization's radical voice. In the face of new and direct attacks upon people of color, sovereign indigenous lands, LGBTQ rights, environmental regulations, religious diversity, women's reproductive health, voting rights, criminal justice reform, access to affordable health care, a strong public education system, collective bargaining, public broadcast, the arts and humanities, and beyond. We must all lift our voices, assert our power, reclaim our future, our past, and our stories, and manifest a vision of our world where we all live with dignity, freedom, and hope. Through art and culture, storytelling and sharing, we can do this. In the words of Assata Shakur, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. Please repeat this. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and protect each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Thank you. Peace and Ashe. Thank you so much.
Wow, I don't know how to follow up on that, but I will give it a go.
I'm going to sit down. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's sit
All
down.
right, cool.
Just a couple of questions. Gina, that was an extraordinary rendition, extraordinary evocation of your life and the influence of your father and those around him. Bringing it to the present day, could you give us some examples of, you're involved in so much activism, but could you give us some examples that are closest to your heart of the activism specifically that you're involved in now?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, in the last 6 years, my father and I founded an organization called Sankofa, S-A-N-K-O-F-A, sankofa.org. Sankofa is a Ghanaian word, which means go back and get it. And in many ways, that's what we do at Sankofa. We reclaim stories and we go to our elders and to elders in the community, to organizations that have been around for many years, and ask how we as artists can be in service of their messaging and what they need. We work with artists, thought leaders, celebrities in partnership with grassroots organizations to shine a light on specific issues. We work in the areas of mass incarceration and juvenile justice, immigration. We work in the areas of violence. We took on this overall banner because we felt there were so many things that we wanted to be able to be rapid responding to. And some of the projects that we do, we engage very large arts collectives and work side by side with them to engage different arts installations and campaigns. One of them is, actually two of them, but one first is something called 4 Freedoms, F-O-R Freedoms. And this is led by a man by the name of Hank Willis Thomas, who is a visual artist, and Eric Gottesman. And it is a collective of artists, and last year in the United States, we did the largest cultural initiative in US history. We engaged all 50 states, as well as Puerto Rico and the capital, Washington, D.C. And we did a Billboard campaign where we engaged artists to create messaging, and we took over massive billboards in all 50 states. And then we reclaimed the artistry of Norman Rockwell. He is an American folk artist, I would say, and he has something called the 4 Freedoms, F-O-U-R, freedoms. And it's freedom from want, freedom from fear, freedom of speech, and freedom of worship. And he depicted these 4 freedoms in his beautiful illustrations, as he always did in the past. And they sold them for war bonds, as posters for war bonds for the Second World War. Well, we reclaimed these images and we did a photo essay where we showed the diversity of the United States. And in the same exact tableaus that he painted those paintings and posters, we set up this photographic essay. And I would love for you to visit it. It's really very important to us. We were lucky enough to get the cover of Time magazine with one of the images, which was Freedom to Worship, where we depicted disciplines of religion. But it was important for us to show the diversity of the United States now, to show that there are, same-sex parents, that there are single parents, that there are black couples, and also from Freedom from Want, which is a traditional Thanksgiving, United States Thanksgiving dinner. We did many different variations, and many of them with Native American and indigenous people in the role of the leader in the photograph. And this is a very exciting initiative, and we're moving into 2020. With that, we did town halls, and we did installations and initiations in all of the major arts institutions in the United States as well. The other is something called the World Human Forum, which I am very proud to be a part of. And it is a collective of thought leaders and dignitaries, artists and indigenous peoples who have come together to share best practices, whether it's about the environment or whether it's in the arts or in politics. We share ideas and ways in which that we can move forward together to break down borders and barriers to be just human beings. And this also is an incredible initiative that Sankofa is a part of.
Thank you. My final question, and briefly if I would, because it's a big subject, but just not many people can speak of sitting on Martin Luther King's knee and the extraordinary influence that the civil rights and the apartheid movement had at that time. Fast forwarding to now, we have Trump, we have nationalist populism, we have xenophobia permitted in a way that we seem to have the lid on it a few years ago. Do you see this generation's struggle as being the old one recast, or do you think there is something different in what we're facing now? in a Twitter-length sentence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say the difference is technology, for sure. Technology, which I'm sure you'll hear more about later, plays a massive role in today's movements, the way in which we can communicate with one another. But I would say that there is nothing like going out into the streets and being among people and touching them and speaking to them and talking about ideas in person. I think the arts are a really important tool to this effect. During the civil rights movement, my father was the organizer with James Baldwin of most of the artists that participated in that movement. He continued throughout his life to be that person, whether it was with the feminist movement, AIM, the Native American movement, or most currently with the March on Washington that the women's movement put together. Artists are a unique way in which to get into the hearts and minds of people because their fan base often wants to do what they want to do too. So I think we have an opportunity if we stick with it and stay with it. We're just constantly, I think, as a people, as a human people, pulling away the onion, peeling away the onion. And I think we're getting deeper and deeper to a connectivity because I also believe in the balance. So even though often all we see is a lot of the hatred, a lot of the war, a lot of the lies that are going on, there is a counter-energetic force that is also at play. And I think it's important for us to keep hope about that, for us to communicate amongst our neighbors and our community and to really talk to one another. And this is also something that For Freedoms does quite beautifully because it is a non-biased space. So we speak to all kinds of people with all kinds of points of view in order to get into a conversation about that. And I think that's something that we need to do more of and that young people, I think, do already. So I think, it's a very interesting time that we're living in, and it's an important opportunity for us as people. And it's said before, create your revolution. And I think aside from revolution, we also must be very conscious and intentional about the evolution of the human species as well. Because I think we all got off to centuries and centuries and centuries ago a rough start.
Right, that is the clarion call. We will create our revolution and our evolution as well. We could have talked for a long time, but Gina, I'm afraid time is up. Don't forget, everybody, hashtag create your revolution. It's not evolution yet. Create your revolution. I'm going to hand over now, but let's give Gina a huge round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Nazan, over to you.
Thank you, John. Create your revolution, that's the call, but the question is how? In Germany, we celebrate these days, as you may know, 30 years of reunification, an historical event that started with a non-violent revolution demanding liberty. Non-violent is also the climate strike movement, Fridays for Future. For 10 months now, students are on the streets protesting for more political commitment and action to prevent global warming. Democracy, this is what the citizens of Hong Kong demand in a non-violent revolution. Unfortunately, there is violence between protesters and the police, and the violence, unfortunately, is getting worse. Not only the relationship between Hong Kong and Beijing are tense, also between China and Tibet for 70 years now. In the following talk, we are going to discover stories from a non-violent revolution. We will talk about identity, about freedom and human rights with 3 Tibetans. Please welcome Rinchen Kando, Tenzin Chogal and Tenzin Geshe. Have a seat there. If you want. Yeah, you can go there. Yeah, feel free. Wherever you want. Have a seat. You have a microphone? Yeah. Okay, first of all, let me just introduce you to our public. So, Rinchen, you are a fighter for women's rights. You are a founding member of the Tibetan Women Association, and you served as Minister of Education in the Tibetan government in exile. Thanks to your commitment, nuns are allowed to study, and they are allowed to achieve a doctoral grade in Buddhist studies. Welcome. Rinchen, you are here today with your husband, Tenzin Chogal. He is the younger brother of the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet. Thank you very much for being here, that you are here tonight. And you are committed in interfaith and understanding. And as many Tibetan refugees, you live in India. Welcome. And our third guest on this panel is Tenzin Geshe. I hope I pronounced the names in the right way. For over 40 years now, you served as private secretary for His Holiness. And you are also the author of a book which is named His Holiness the 14th, an illustrated biography. And we can see and discover in this book unpublished photographies. Thank you for being here today with us. Thank you. Tenzin Chogal, Tibet is an example for a non-violent revolution. How does Tibet look on violent and non-violent revolution in the world now?
Hello?
Yeah, it's open here.
I think not only Tibetans, I think any people who is committed for peace is totally surprised the violence that we have today.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Everything fine? I'm fine.
No,
I was just surprised that
it's not only the Tibetans who are peaceful. I think there are many people who are peaceful. But we only notice the negative aspects of our world today.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about culture.
What?
About culture. For the Tibetans, culture is very important, the transmission of cultural heritage. What is, in your opinion, the power of culture for the Tibetans?
I think culture is one of the most powerful factors in human life. And I think today, many culture is tampered with other interests. The real culture of human beings, you find it in children. But the children got it, we adults have spoiled that peaceful approach. So I think it depends what kind of education we have, and also the environment, then also following what is politically correct, but not really saying what you want.
So what is politically correct?
I don't think anything is politically correct. It's just making way convenient for people who will use the slogan. How can you be politically correct when you are artificial?
Tenzin Geshe, you know the Dalai Lama very, very well. You served more than 40 years as his secretary. And as we already talked about the importance of Tibetan culture, what would you say, what would the Dalai Lama say about the power of culture for the Tibetans?
As you explained earlier, I'm working on a book on the Dalai Lama with the Rolly Books of India. And I feel very strongly that the theme you have for creating revolution seems to be something that the Dalai Lama has fulfilled. And I just want to give you very briefly 3 examples. In spite of all the terrible things that has happened to Tibet and the Tibetans since Tibet was invaded and occupied by communist China, the Dalai Lama repeatedly says that he has no hatred against the Chinese, not even against the leaders. So I think this kind of deeper level of culture, of tolerance, is, I think, something like a revolution in some ways. And then also, in spite of the fact that the Dalai Lama is really deeply revered by especially by the Tibetans, they consider him almost like a manifestation of the Buddha. And then we also have many who are followers of the Tibetan form of Buddhism, and they respect and revere the Dalai Lama. But in spite of that, he always constantly teaches his followers that we must respect other religious traditions. So I think that also...
Can you put
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Shall I repeat?
No, it's fine, I think.
Shall I just go? Okay. Anyway, he often teaches his followers that we must respect other religious traditions. So this also, I think, is, a deeper form of culture where tolerance plays a very important part. And then, of course, there are many. I just want to give 3 examples. Then he has always been promoting compassion. So with this kind of forgiveness for the Chinese, then his humility to respect other religious traditions, and then also on a broader level to promote compassion. I think this kind of a cultural attitude is something that really will, if people are able to practice, I think is really something that a revolution will take place. That's what I feel. And I'm very happy that I'm here because of this book I'm working on.
The revolution is not necessarily always violent. You showed us how it works. In a non-violent way, and respect is very important. So, Rinchen, actually you are dedicated to a revolution on your own. You want to empower Tibetan women to take on roles on leadership in their communities. And in your opinion, everybody should have same access to education and religious training, actually. So what would you say, what is your commitment about? Is it about equal rights, or is it more about the transmission of Buddhist values? Or both?
Well, I believe it's not just to say equal rights, but I think it's important to understand the result of being equal. Because if you live an equal life, the atmosphere can be so peaceful, it can be so enjoyable. Therefore, to have an equal right, the aim should not be just to say that I want to do the same thing as the other one does, but I think it's to say that may I create something so that we can have a more peaceful atmosphere and a better world. So that has been my goal. And then to do this, when you look into the community, not just Tibetans. For me, women are women all over the world. So particularly in the Tibetan case, we have a unique situation because of our political situation. Those of us who are here tonight, we live in India, and we've been doing that for the last 60 years. And I always remember that we have a double cause to carry on. One is to see what's going wrong in the community and try to right it, starting with the women and children. And the other is, what can you as a woman also do for your country, for your nation? So these two thoughts have been in my mind all my life. And then through this, I've seen the world, and I have tried to look at every woman, every situation in the way I would look at the Tibetan people. So therefore, I conclude that it's very, very important for the women to be educated, to receive equal education, and also equal opportunity in life, in all spheres of life. Because sometimes women do everything, but when it comes to the conclusion, they are counted less.
But what would you say, what is the role of women in the Tibetan non-violent revolution? What is the role? Why it's so important to empower women?
Well, I think if you empower women, okay, let's talk about women, empower women non-violently, I think the result could be much better. Because if you teach them how to be violent, then the result could be also not so comfortable. Therefore, yes, empower women in every way, but let that be accompanied by non-violence. So this has been, I don't know if I answered your question.
Would you consider yourself as a feminist?
Feminist? I think that's just a title. You know, if you believe in equality, you don't need a title. So I believe that women should have equal rights. And I also believe that we have the innate quality, and also if we allow that to come out with confidence, we can do anything. So we don't need a title. We just be equal. Yeah.
Education is very important. You just mentioned it. I read that your mother was an illiterate. But however, she taught you how important education is. Would you say that your mother inspired you? Is your mother a role model for you?
Well, when I said illiterate, actually my mother was illiterate because, like in many countries, in Tibet also, the girls' education was not considered important in those days. So my mother, although she came from a good family, but she was never educated, so she was illiterate. But she believed in education when we came in exile and started living in India, and she saw the world, and she also believed that education is important for the girls. And therefore, she really encouraged me to study, and most importantly, I think I would like to share this with you. The main reason why she said study is, we were brought out of Tibet even before '59. Some of our families did that to educate children in India. And I was one of the very few lucky girls who was also brought out to India to study. But then in the meantime, the whole time changed, and we could not go back to Tibet anymore. So my parents had a difficult time even to survive because they had nothing with them. And I remember my mother used to sell her jewelries to pay my school fees. Now the point here is, I used to feel very bad to every time think about the fees at school. And one day I said, Mom, I don't want to continue anymore because you have to do all of this. So she said, now here comes the answer. She says, I want you to be educated. Doesn't matter through my jewelry or whatever I have to do. Look at us. We had everything in Tibet, and today we have nothing. I want to give you something that can be with you everywhere you go, anytime you're there. So I think that's how she believed in the power of education, and I think she was very right. So I was inspired by that as well.
Yeah, she was right. Tending Geshe, allowing nuns the same educational opportunities as monks. I can imagine, I've never been in Tibet, or in India actually, but I can imagine that this demand was a kind of revolutionary. So I would like to know if the Dalai Lama was a big supporter of this idea when this came out.
Absolutely. In fact, this is also one of the things that I, for a long time, felt that the Dalai Lama has been amazing in that he introduced the study of philosophical texts among the nuns, which was not existent in past Tibet. So this was something new that he did. So as I mentioned earlier, when I think of the theme, it seems that the Dalai Lama seems to really fulfill the theme that you have, create a revolution. And in fact, if we have time, I just want to briefly mention two results of the power of his education amongst people for not taking up violence. For example, in Tibet, since 2009, over 150 Tibetans have self-immolated because of the terrible conditions existing in Tibet. And if they are, I mean, most Tibetans feel that if Tibetans have enough courage, enough determination to sacrifice their own lives, they could easily commit the kind of violence that we see when people who indulge in suicide bombs. But none of the Tibetans have done that. They just committed self-immolation without harming any Chinese. So I think that also is one of the revolutionary ideas that the Dalai Lama has always been teaching his people on the theme of nonviolence. And people and the Tibetans themselves, I think, have practiced it. And I think this is something really amazing, I feel. Similarly, some years ago, the Dalai Lama made a comment that people shouldn't use animal furs. And in Tibet, there was a big, especially in eastern and northeastern part of Tibet, there was a big tradition of people using fur for kind of ornament for their dressing. After the Dalai Lama's advice, many people burned their fur dresses. And the Chinese were so surprised. They started condemning some people for burning furs. And many of the Tibetans who were working for Chinese government office, they were forced to wear fur dressings. So anyway, I haven't put it very clearly, but what I want to say is, not only has the Dalai Lama these revolutionary ideas, but his advice has been followed by the Tibetans. And I think this kind of thinking on a deeper level of culture for tolerance and forgiveness and compassion are the kind of things that will really change the world for a better human, sort of harmonious kind of a society.
Tenzin Chigal, do you think or do you fear sometimes that the non-violent revolution can change in a violent one? Is there the possibility of a misunderstanding of the Buddhist values and that the atmosphere can change into a violent one? Do you fear this sometimes? Yeah. Oh, sorry, okay, I can repeat it. So, do you fear sometimes, or do you think that a change or there could be a misunderstanding of the Buddhist values for a non-violent revolution, and that this atmosphere can just change into a violent one?
But non-violence or peace, I think it's a many cardinal factor of all spiritual tradition. So therefore, I don't think it'll work right away. It takes time. Then I think to be able to overcome violence, we must see the negative side of violence. And then also our educational system in schools, how they grow up. Then not only on children, but I think we adults, we should also learn something about nonviolence. And it'll take time. Then of course, as I said before, violence just didn't come like lightning. It's a built-up case. So if you eliminate the reason for violence to come into being, then I think we are making some kind of a help. And then underneath the problem of all violence or anger, it's where there is injustice. Unless we can be just, there will be no peace in the world.
So revolution in a non-violent way is possible. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I hand over to John. Thank you. You can take your... Is it? Yeah, it's on.
Hello. Dear sisters, dear brothers, are you with us?
Thank you, thank you.
Where's the revolution? Where is it
much.
happening? Is it happening while we are sitting on our chairs? No.
Yeah.
Why don't you
Very good,
stand
thank
up?
you.
Please stand up. On your chairs.
Have a safe trip.
Stand
Bye-bye.
up. Please, everybody. And look around. Who is next to you? Who is your next neighbor? Your sister, your brother? Let's, for the next 5
What should we
minutes,
do?
I
didn't
would
follow. What
like
should we
our
do?
bodies to speak. Let's listen and
Okay.
speak to our bodies. And the revolution is not happening at home. It's happening right on the street. So please, everybody, let's join us on the street. Please, come here. Make 2 lines. Yeah, 2 lines on the street. I want to see you here. Build a row of people. All the people from the back come in the front. Take the space. Please, you have 2 minutes to do that. It's a little physical exercise. I know you can do it. I know. Everybody has a view. Everybody is in the first row. This is Arte and ZDF. Everybody's in the first row. Please join us now. Come here. Yeah, build a line, a bridge. We are building a street. We go to the street. The march for freedom. The march for peace. Please join us. Come. You will see nothing in the back. Everybody's in the front. Right. Right here now. Right now it's happening. What are these kids say? Beautiful. Beautiful. Come from the back. You will not see nothing. It only takes 5 minutes. Join us here. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Corey, what can we say? That was just phenomenal. You are completely, come over here onto the stage just for 1 second. Going to ask you, if you can breathe, speak really, really slowly. Ladies and gentlemen, do take your seats for the next sequence, and then we'll have an opportunity to thank Corey again at the end of this. Do take your seats silently, please, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm just going to ask Corey one question, and then we're going to move on to the next segment. I know that was absolutely extraordinary. Apart from everything, Corey, what can dance do? What can dance say that other media can't? I mean, that was absolutely mesmerizing. If you'd have seen the audience there and the way they were looking at you, you had them spellbound. So just tell us, in terms of self-expression, in terms of changing the world, what specifically can dance do? There you go, take the mic.
That's a big question. Bear with me while I bring my adrenaline level down to talking mode. How can dance? I'm not gonna go to the change the world, but what can dance do? I mean, for me, it's an exchange that's beyond words, clearly. It's the deepest way that I'm able to communicate with other people. It's also the most empathetic device that I have, the most empathetic tool that I have. There's many times where I don't understand what people are saying through language, but as soon as I read their body language or am able to tap into their human emotions, the signals that their body is giving off, this is enough movement for me, and this already I call dance, just the observation of another human being's spirit. But once I can tap into that, it's a dialogue that's beyond anything I can really put into words. It's a visceral experience that is bringing the human experience closer. Yeah, it's how I get out of my vessel here, and when I'm really in it, in the groove of it, in the spirit of it, and when it's beyond me, which is the place that I choose to perform and live in, it's really an experience that I feel like I'm tapping into that other person's spirit, so I'm going beyond their vessel, per se, but trying to find who they really are and actually dance with them from that place.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause to, that was a visceral experience, to Corey Scott Gilbert. There are more ways than one for self-expression of the body. The T-shirt is another one. And Philip Rook, who you are going to hear from now, is CEO of Spreadshirt. And he will tell you a little bit more. Spreadshirt are not just partners of the Buchmesse and of Arts Plus, but they too, through that form of self-expression on the shirt, are trying to change the world. Philip, over to you.
Okay, should we run the... Video. Thank you. I love that video. What that shows me is people in non-violent revolution. Here are people who are out on the street saying what they care about, what they love, what they want to express. Some of them are big. You see Black Lives Matter, 1 billion and rising. Some of them are really small. There's a kid in there who's learning to walk again, and he publishes his videos and uses t-shirts to encourage others to deal with issues as big as that. And these are small revolutions and big revolutions that are going on every day. And it was for this that we built spread shops. We built a system that allows everybody to set up in minutes a merchandising shop where they can sell their ideas to their followers and allow their followers to get involved with the campaign. Because what we have seen growing is a trend in what we call on-person self-expression. That people want to go out into the street, into their workplaces, into their homes, with messages about the things they believe. So we are not the revolutionaries. I'm one of the few non-revolutionaries up here. Our job is to enable revolutionaries to spread their message. Now, there is nothing new with revolution being caused by messaging. I currently live in the former East Berlin. Now, that's not an unusual thing these days, but for almost half my life, Europe was divided by a wall, by an iron curtain. I was raised in the UK and went to a slightly militaristic school whose slogan was, "Better dead than red." And now, we've seen a revolution go on over the last 30 years. Down came the wall, and in Berlin, we're getting ready for that celebration. That wall did not come down because of a violent revolution. It did not come down because of one person with one scheme. That came down because of messages that went out there and social movement. It probably started with Gorbachev's glasnost. And there he was, pushing for openness and pushing for transparency in the Eastern societies with a political message. My American friends would claim that it was Ronald Reagan with his tear down the wall speech. And it must have had some impact, because I was in Berlin this weekend at the Brandenburg Brigade, where we had the Festival of Lights, and they put straight across the wall, "Tear down this wall." We who work in Leipzig and live in Leipzig tend to feel it was the social protest that went on there under the banner of "Wir sind das Volk," we are the nation. And it was a message of unity back then that has sadly been hijacked for people who are looking for disunity nowadays. But you can see that messages cause change. And when we look at the next 30 years and where we've got to go next, those changes are immense. You hear about basic freedoms in some countries and basic freedoms for women and women's rights going on. But we also have to face environmental changes. We have to learn how to be sustainable. We have to learn how to get on with each other. Now, that is not going to come from one big scheme. That is going to come from hundreds of thousands of small revolutions. That is going to come from people spreading messages. And that is really where we work. Now, this is also why we chose to sponsor the Create Your Revolution. When we ran into this team 3 months ago, it said what we believed. This is about getting your ideas. And this is a festival of ideas in books, in media, and getting those out so people can use them for revolution, that people can use them for cultural change. And that really appealed to us. But I do come here today with a warning from the t-shirt industry, that you have great ideas and you can create that revolution, but that most of those ideas will not work. And they will not work for the simple reason you do not empower your followers, that we present complex ideas to people and we don't give them the mechanism to use that and express it. Good example for my country, the Brexit. Yeah? Those Brexit campaigners started with a great big lie down a bus. How much is spent on the EU that isn't true, and people believed it. They followed on with TVs with slogans like "protect our borders," "give us back our sovereignty." People could wear that. People could put that on a banner. Yeah? Those of us who are more EU-loving, like myself, failed to do that. I was asked on a TV interview, "Why do you like the EU so much?" Well, I work in business, and my response was, "It has come up with sensible cross-border regulation." I'm enchained. Honestly, sensible cross-border regulation, worst T-shirt slogan ever. Nobody's going to wave that on a banner, are they? Yeah? Terrible. We lost because we did not give our followers, our fans, the people who wanted to campaign against Brexit, a passionate message they could use. Whether it's a T-shirt, a banner, or a conversation, we failed. And we see this all over the world. It wasn't a surprise to us that Donald Trump won the election. We saw issues that was being raised. We saw his Make America Great on a cap being out there, being in T-shirts, being in merchandising. We didn't see that coming from the other side. And we see time and again that people with really simple messages win. Now, that presents a problem, because mostly people can come up with very simple messages that don't mean anything. Personally, I feel Donald Trump's Make America Great Again was the only thought he had. There was no policies behind it, no plan, no nothing. But he had a simple message and empowered his followers. That actually, we deal with much more complex issues. How to make Tibet work, how to change attitudes to women, how to make Europe work. They're complex, but we still have to dig and find those simple, empowering messages that can be used by our customers. So, when I look at what people are doing, and when I talk to you guys here, and we talk to some of you out there in these show, we are pushing you and challenging you to find the messages that work, find the messages that encourage people to follow your ideas. If you do not, you stand a serious danger that somebody will read your book, they will love your ideas, and they put it back on the shelf afterwards, because explaining a whole book to somebody is difficult. So give them that message. And it does work. Think about all the things which are going on around the environment at the moment, and all of the various campaigns and science which is there. But a teenage girl motivates 4 million people onto the street, and I find myself at Brandenburg Gate again with 250,000 people with a simple message: how dare you steal my future? And people are able to do that. And I'm wearing today, I think, probably the best example I see from the European Space Agency, one of the partners we work with. They have encapsulated all the challenges we are going to face in the next 30 years down to one message. Because when you look from space up there back at our planet, and you look how far the next planets are, you realize there is no planet B. One way or other, in the next 30 years, we're going to have to work out how to manage this planet, live together, and find harmony, because there is nowhere else to go. Their science, their view from the top of the world shows that. And so my challenge to you today is find that message, whether you're a large scientific organization or a kid learning to walk or anything in between. Please, please look for that message that will empower your people to use a placard, to have a phrase, or even put it on a t-shirt, but find that message. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Philip. That's a resounding call to everybody that when we're creating revolutions, we have very, very appealing messages, which is what you are practicing. Do stay with us. We're gonna stay standing to keep us going. Jochen, do join us. You introduced Corey earlier. Jochen is founder of the Sascha Waltz company that you, and in amongst many other things as well. And please welcome Adrian Wooten, who is CEO of Film London as well. And you will notice you have an all-male panel, and that's for a reason. Now, there's an all-female panel straight after the break. So, the future of culture, but particularly with reference, as has already been mentioned by Philip, to two events, one a happy one a not so happy one, that have bookended the last 30 years, the Berlin Wall and Brexit. Jochen, I wanted to come to you. Now, I had the good fortune and the bad fortune to witness both. I was an accredited journalist working in East Berlin at the time. To have seen what has happened to Berlin over the last 30 years, you have been right at the heart of it with Tacheles, which you may have to explain briefly to some members of the audience. Most will know as well. Give us a sense of what has happened to cultural activism in these 30 years, from that incredible outpouring and the coming together of two cities to now.
The wall in Berlin was dividing a country for 40 years, and the peaceful revolution brought it together. And it was not only for the Germans to reunite. We could see the whole world breathing with us, Germans, feeling that two main, let's say, well, it was capitalism and communism standing. You remember Checkpoint Charlie with the tanks standing in front line. That was the momentum of the peaceful revolution. So it opened a whole window of opportunity in Berlin. Artists from all over the world moved to Berlin. I was one of them, to conquer the empty space, to get into buildings, to squat houses, to create new perspectives, open spaces for open minds, for free spirits. So the power of freedom is tremendous. It's maybe the biggest dream of mankind is freedom. What Gina Belafonte was telling the story from her father, Harry Belafonte, in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the dream of there is no race, there is no color of skin.
I'm going to stop you there for a second. I've just been told that I thought we were standing, but we're out of shot, so we have to sit. So continue speaking as we sit.
But that's maybe good to stop and to come to the point of your question. Berlin became a place of opportunities, and I was just one of this coincidental. Tacheles started as a space for future projects, but it lasted not very long and it collapsed somehow, and as many other places disappeared from the landscape, from the urban cultural landscape. So I really proclaim that we have to get back of these places. 30 years afterwards, I even start a conversation because we saw gentrification.
Yeah.
People kicked out of their spaces. So part of the revolution should be and must be that we proclaim the spaces, that we say the future generation, let's say the people who go on the streets now with the Fridays for Future moment, where do they have their spaces? And I fight for that. I think the next generation, every generation needs that kind of spaces. And before I end here, I would like to say something that refers also to what we could see with Cory, the dancer of Sasha Waltz and Guests. Sasha became a very political artist over the last 10 years. And the claim of this is here, create your revolution. But I could even say also what you just said, it's not only about create your revolution, it's also about oh my God, the word, to
Revolutionize.
No, yeah, tell me the verb of your revolution.
Revolutionize.
Revolutionize, thank you so much. Revolutionize your creation. Revolutionize your creation means that we as artists, as creative people, have to do different than we did before. Create your revolution sounds it's like a proclamation, but to revolutionize the create. My God, this will follow me now. I think you all know what I want to say. I think we have to go maybe different directions as we did now before, standing up, building a street, creating a theater situation. We have to rethink. We have a wall can be overcome. That's really important. We should never forget. We should think about the third space, the third way of thinking. We should not think about plan A and plan B, about Brexit or not Brexit. Maybe the whole thing is rubbish anyway, to think about nationalism in general. So I think we need a completely reset of our mindset. That's what I really deeply believe, and I think artists and the culture in general is able to put us the mirror in front, as we just saw with Cory walking in the street. This is the mirror. We look at this mirror and we can break also the mirror, as what he did. He can release his chains. As Gina said before, we have nothing to lose, only our chains. And we can just experiment and do that. Thank you.
Thank you. You can keep it. You can keep it.
Revolutionize.
Yeah, revolutionize, remember. Adrian, we're talking about the word gentrification. Now, London, from a long time earlier, has been massively gentrified. It's a huge money laundering center. It is also a huge global center, but it is also a great creative center. And we worked together and we did all the statistics around the creative industries, which is an extraordinary success story. We'll come to something about Brexit in a second. But on this question of when a city becomes a huge global city, which is what Berlin either has already become or is on the cusp of becoming now, and London has been for some time and New York has been, artists are driven out from that. How does that affect the film industry? How do you protect the film industry from just becoming another manifestation of global capital?
Well, I think the thing is, I mean, the good news about the UK and the film industry is that actually, for a variety of reasons, which are technical and economic, is that the talent's coming from all over the UK, and actually, it's not just London. London is the global centre, that's absolutely true. But considering that many of the greatest stuff that's happening is also being made in Belfast, or it's being made in Scotland, or it's being made in the Midlands, actually what's happening in the UK is a kind of democratisation of film and television. And I mean, you know, we'll come on to Brexit, but actually the themes, and you know, I'm not an activist in the context of other people that have been speaking so brilliantly and passionately, or performing so brilliantly and passionately. But actually, I really do think, it's not that Brexit's a sideshow, but the kind of issues around climate change and environment, the issues around inclusivity and diversity are much, much more important than whatever trade regulations we end up with Brexit or whatever visa regulations we end up. I don't believe London in that context. London is, in a way, it's too big. It's too big. You're right about artists, but artists will just go, they will just drift somewhere else and they'll find another warehouse somewhere else. It's never stopped artists. We're not going to, you know, artists may move to Berlin, but then they'll move to another part of Berlin because those warehouses will become gentrified. It'll happen, you know, it's like the games industry is in parts of the Midlands rather than in parts of London now. To be honest, I don't worry about that because I think art is like art, this is not culture, this is specifically about art, is like osmosis. People will find that route and find that way for cultural production. Our job is to foster that, to try and find ways that they can express themselves and join the dots and the connections. If we can keep on fostering that talent, the talent will come through. We're in a very healthy place in the UK in that sense, and I don't think any of the political shenanigans that are going to go on, frankly, are going to stop that.
Philip, you are living in Berlin, but your company is based in Leipzig.
Yep.
And one of the great strengths of Germany is, I mean, Adrian was talking about it in the UK, but it still feels to many people like a very centralized country in terms of power. But Germany, probably like the United States, but not like the UK and not like France, is very decentralized. There are so many great cultural endeavors in 8, 10, 12, 15 cities, including here. Give us a sense of what the Leipzig scene has been like, what influence Leipzig as a city has had on you and the company and the development of the company, and what you're trying to do, not just commercially, but as you've been explaining in terms of your broader mission.
So Leipzig in the last few years has become the city that people moved out of Berlin to move into in the artistic world. It has grown, and like every city that I've ever lived in, is gentrifying. And that's just an ongoing process. But you know, we're part of that. Very proud of the fact we have created several hundred jobs in Leipzig that generate livings for people. But I see the same going on in Leipzig that I see in Berlin, that I spend a third of my working life in America, and I was originally brought up in rural England, and in between I've lived in Tanzania, Thailand and America. The same thing is happening. We gentrify, we leave people behind. And as we leave people behind, both politically and financially, they become frustrated. Brexit, Trump, the frustrations you see around the world are nothing more than people being left behind, feeling like they no longer have a say, feeling like there is nothing they can campaign for, so they may as well vote for the thing that's going to turn the world upside down. Now, what you see going on in Leipzig right now is it's become the liberal heart of Saxony. Yeah. So, yeah, in Leipzig, everybody is international, they're very liberal, they're very artistic. But around us, you see in the smaller towns in Saxony, the rise of the AfD. That is, again, the people who the gentrification of the East, the wall coming down, left behind. Their life is still the same. They haven't benefited as much, and so they feel bitter, and they vote for the AfD.
Which is a very helpful way of taking me to the final set of questions. And briefly, if I could, because we are running behind time, if I could ask you to confine yourselves each to a couple of sentences. To your point, Philip, I'll come to you first, Jochen. Is the role of cultural people to change society, which is what we've been talking about, or to reflect society? Because one of the great criticisms of the creative endeavor of creative people is that they represent one mindset, a liberal, tolerant, usually metropolitan mindset, and that the left behinds that you refer to are disenfranchised, not just from politics, but from culture. And if I could really ask you all to keep your responses to that question, to that challenge, very brief. Jochen.
Absolutely clear. No reflection about that. Time is up. We are in the deepest crisis in human history. It's not the time anymore that culture just reflects the present. It is absolute urgent that culture takes position and changes the reality. And I'm not anymore interested in the future of culture. Because we were talking so many times, what's the future of culture? What culture needs? Who's interested in the needs of culture? I want to speak about the culture of future. I want to speak, this is more easy than to revolutionize the great creation. That's why I started, for example, the World Human Forum in Delphi, and you all know that. You all know it because it's everywhere. These are the colorful 17 development goals. The Sustainable Development Goals is the global agenda till 2030. We have 10 more years. That is the time given to all of us to change. And I think it's good that we have that time in front of us, and we have to put all our efforts, and I will run a festival very soon next year, and I commit myself completely in that culture of change. And I think I want to encourage other artists, and they are out there. Hundreds and thousands of people are ready for that change. And about Leipzig, we need to know the fall of the Berlin Wall started in Leipzig. Yep. Because all the manifestations started there. So it all starts with the first small step. And here at the Frankfurt Book Fair, we are hundreds of thousands of people. If we get ready for the change, nobody can stop us anymore, I think.
Right. We're all going to march. Adrian, in literally a sentence, the left is your job to reflect or to change, to challenge?
I think it has to. I don't agree with my friend here. It has to be both. I think, because I don't think that art shouldn't always have to be agitprop. I think it's important. It's radically important in the context that we have. But I also think art's there to make us laugh. Art's there to provide us with a whole range of sensory pleasures. I don't think it's just about one particular element of change. And when it is about change, it can't just be about the liberal elite, because the whole point about Brexit is, and I'm not a Brexiteer, I never was, but the problem is that those people's voices, it's not a question of they won because of a logo, they won because their culture wasn't being reflected. And a lot of people on the liberal elite, and a lot of intellectuals, and a lot of cultural institutions, mine own included, have all been very, very complacent about saying they're all wrong, they're all racist, they're all stupid. They're not. And we have to respect that. And actually what we need to do is build bridges with art. Build bridges.
I love that. Okay. I think personally, art and literature is about empowering and inspiring people. And I'll leave you the final thought that came from my 10-year-old goddaughter when I was saying, how is it we get hundreds of thousands of kids on the street supporting climate change? And she said, we're the Harry Potter generation. We were taught by a book, we can fight, we can get out there and do something. That was literature leading kids, and that is art inspiring people. So.
Yeah. Here. I agree with that.
We will end this panel just with this quick thought. When my old organisation, the Creative Industries Federation, we did our own referendum on Brexit at the same time in 2016. 96% of creatives voted to remain. And shortly afterwards, we had an event. And the Mayor of London said in his keynote speech, looking at all the audience, I just want to know who was the 4% of you in here who voted to leave, which got a sense of where people think the creatives lie. Thank you hugely to our three panelists. I just need to say to you before our break that afterwards we've got a fantastic second half. We have Africa's Erin Brockovich, we have a space artist, we have a young activist from Malawi, we have a huge lot more. You have got a maximum of 6 minutes, because we're running late, and it's all my fault, to get yourself a drink, to say hello you want to be, and then come straight back for a really good second half, which Nazan will open. So enjoy your break, and please thank our panelists. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, could you come back from the bar over to, we're about to start, so could you all come back over so you can watch the second half of proceedings, please? And if you could be silent, please, because Nazan is about to, so come back over, everybody, please. And come to the front if you want to see.
You're welcome back. Have a seat. You can drink and eat in front of us. It's not impolite. You're allowed to. All right, okay, so welcome back. I'm glad that you found your seats. And in the next 30 minutes, we will talk about why everything is on stake in a globally connected world. We will discover how powerful grassroots movements can be and which impact a single person can make in this world, for a community, for a region, for a nation, or even worldwide. We have 3 guests on stage, and I can tell you they are all 3 power women. So please welcome Memory Banda, yes. She's a Malawian activist and leader for girls' rights. Welcome. Jennifer Clement, author and president of PEN International and creator of Women's Manifesto. Welcome. And last but not least, Phyllis Omido, environmental activist and founder of the Center for Justice, Governance and Environmental Action based in Kenya. Phyllis, let's start with you. You are dubbed as, quote, the East African Aaron Brockovich. 4 years ago, you were awarded with the Goldman Environmental Prize. If you don't know what that is, it's like an environmental Oscar. And overnight, you became a very famous grassroots activist. And you won this prize because of your fight against lead poisoning. Can you tell us what was the moment that triggered your activism? It's open.
So for a long time that I did my work, I denied the fact that I was an activist. I remember when journalists would write articles about me in the newspaper and call me an environmental activist, I would say, no, I'm not an activist. I'm just trying to say that this is wrong and it has to be corrected. But it took one night in a Kenyan police cell after I had been arrested. I had been dehumanized. My shoes were taken off in public, and I was made to walk barefoot and thrown in a police van. And the next day, I was arraigned in court and charged with inciting my community to violence and illegal gathering. That night, while I slept, and the next morning when I woke up, and I stood in front of the court, that is the day I believe I became an activist.
Can you just tell to the public what your campaign was about? What were you fighting against?
My campaign is, because it's still ongoing, about the health and environment of Kenyan communities. Because we were exposed to lead poisoning because the government brought in smelters that would clean up used lead acid batteries, leave the toxic waste in Kenya, leave us with environmental and health impacts to deal with, and export pure lead to other countries. And therefore, this is what I started standing up against, because one of the people that was affected is my son. I think he's the first one that was diagnosed with lead poisoning. And after I followed up, I got 3 other children that also tested positive for lead poisoning. After that, we tested a whole community, and it was horrific that in a community of 3,000, almost 80% of the people are exposed to lead poisoning.
So people were poisoned, the region, the surroundings, the environment was poisoned?
The whole area is poisoned. The river where the people drink their water from, because this is a poor community, they have free water from the river. This water is contaminated with lead poison. The base, we tested the base, and it has a lot of lead at the bottom of it. The wells that were dug in the community to help the community when the rivers were dry, those wells have lead poisoning in them. The iron sheets where, when it rains, we tap the water that is used in the households are full of lead. So the whole community is contaminated. The playgrounds are contaminated.
Actually, you pay a very high price for your fight and for your commitment. You received numerous death threats, and there have been different attempts to kidnap your son. Yes. Can you tell us, where do you take this will and the strength to go on with your fight? Where does this unshakable will comes from?
It's not unshakable, because there have been times when I curled up and cried as well. There have been times when I was terrified, even to sleep on a bed, and I had to sleep under a bed. But every time that I'm scared, nature always sends me a reason to go on. I remember the first time when I came out of, I had been charged in court and I went back home. And my son was waiting for me. And the first thing he asked me is, Mom, are you a bad person? And I said, no, I'm not a bad person, Papa. And he said, are the police bad people? And I said, no, the police are not bad people. And he said, so why did they arrest you if you're not bad and they're not bad? And so when he asked me that question, I knew that I had to go on. I had to go on so that he can understand that what I was doing was right and that what I was doing was not to embarrass him. Because unfortunately also he had seen me in the police, in the TV with the police throwing me on the van in a very dehumanizing way. And so that picture was with him. And I had to continue so that as he grows up, he will not be embarrassed by his mother, but he will understand that what I stood for, that was the price that I had to pay for it.
What? Phyllis, what exactly do you want to change? Is it awareness for environmental questions? Is it what is it about? What is your aim actually?
We share a planet, all of us as human beings, and all that I want is that we all take care of the planet together in an equal way. We cannot assume that because it's a poor community in Africa, somewhere that we have no connection to that is affected, that we are not affected on the other end. We share a planet, and whatever happens in Africa has an impact here in some way. I believe maybe that's why I chose Germany as one of the leading automobile countries in the whole world to publish my book, my first book, so that maybe I could create some awareness of our linkages. Even though I am back in Africa, I have links here because I know that at some point, those batteries that were recycled in Kenya and sent out as pure lead to other countries might have also ended up here, being a leading automobile country. So that is all that I'm trying to say. We have a planet. Let us all be responsible for each other.
So shaping awareness, Germany and all Europe is concerned. Yeah, this is the book that you wrote, Mit der Wut einer Mutter, with the anger of a mother. I don't know if this is the real title in English, if the book will be released in English. Thank you very much, Phyllis.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and the empowerment of women, this is what Jennifer Clement fight for. And actually, Jennifer, you are the first woman, the first president of the PAN International, being a woman. And in this role, you launched last year, in the first time of PAN's history, the Women's Manifesto. And this manifesto is about, or it proclaims, free speech for women, the right to read, the right to write. And can you tell us what was the reason to do this? What urged you to publish this manifesto?
Well, first I'd like to thank you for the invitation to be here with all of you and to share the stage with these exceptional women is an honor. So, yes, I was the first woman elected in 100 years, almost 100 years. And so I felt it was very important to place women in the center of the organization. We're the oldest organization of writers and the largest in the world. This evening, people have talked a lot about culture in a very positive way, as something sort of magical and good. But actually, in studying the problem of women writers and women in the world in general, it is actually culture and religion and tradition that are used as excuses to harm women and girls. So this is the core of the manifesto, is that human rights are more important then culture, then tradition, and then religion.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what changed since this manifesto? Can a manifesto change things?
Well, I think that what's it's a surprise to me actually, because the manifesto has really, it's just gone so into the world in this amazing way that I never expected. So, for example, Nicola Sturgeon has it in her office, framed. It's been translated into all these languages. The Zulu people in KwaZulu-Natal have taken it on. It's in Zulu. And just now, the UNESCO has taken the manifesto as the heart of their worldwide gender campaign. So these are things that I never expected, and I've tried to understand, why this document has had this kind of effect. And I think it's because it's actually a work of sorrow as opposed to a work of anger. And the truth is that I imagine many of us in this room, when you read that in India, and this is a report from 2018 by the Indian government, that there's 63 million women missing in India. I mean, I feel sorrow. I feel bereft, and 21 million women and girls living in homes where they're not wanted. Then, in terms of pen, in terms of the world of writing for women, even for white women of privilege who are educated, in the prizes that women receive, this is a study that has been a serious study. In something like 97% of the cases where a woman wins a prize for her book, the book is about a man. So women's stories are just not important. They just aren't. And so as president of PEN and the first woman president, I felt it was very important to put women into the center of the organization during my presidency.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, you are not only the president of the PEN, but you are also an author. You wrote several books. Lots of them had been translated in several languages. So can you tell us what is the power of fiction? What is the power of storytelling?
I think, PEN, the thing that's very special about PEN, it has these two sides. One is the strong defense of freedom of expression, but we also believe in literature as a force for social change. So if you look back, especially on the novel has been a great place where social change has occurred. So we honor this very much in PEN. And I mean, there are examples that are very obvious, but they're always good to remember. For example, Oliver Twist changed child labor laws in the United Kingdom, and we don't remember any journalism of that time. If you go to France and you think of Zola's Germinal, it changed conditions for minors in France. Victor Hugo's Les Misérables changed the way that we see the poor. For the first time, we were able to see poor people as having dignity. And of course, the novels of Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte changed property rights for women in a very big way in that country. And there are examples of this. If you move to other countries, every country has their example of novels that actually created social change. Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating topic, and PEN very much honors this.
That's the power of fiction. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Our next guest is actually a very optimistic person, and she believes that women and girls in Malawi can have or will have a better future. Memory, you are 23 years old. Only 23 years old, I have to say. And I mention your age because in your young age, you already did a huge or an historical change in Malawi for girls. You changed the marriage law. And I saw a TED Talk of you, which you gave in 2015, so 4 years ago, which has been viewed over 1 million times. That's incredible already. And you told in this TED Talk your motivation, why you're campaigning. And actually your sister plays a very big role in your activism. She did something that you wouldn't do or that you haven't done. Can you tell us about?
Thank you very much. Basically, in Malawi, we have been talking about culture as it plays a very important role in our daily life, and it is what sets our values, our feelings, and everything. And when it comes back to my country and my personal experience, it happens that you know how like Malawi is very beautiful, it is diverse, the culture and everything. But there are also some negative cultural systems that are set up in our communities that actually undermine women and girls' abilities. So if women and girls, girls, if they grow up in such kind of a community, it means that they are being limited. So growing up in such kind of community, I saw a lot of us girls being pushed backwards and girls dropping out of school. And it happens that in my country, once a girl child reaches puberty stage, they're supposed to be taken away from their homes and go into some place where they have to learn about growing up as a rite of passage. And that's what culture is. And we grew up in that. And our mothers grew up in that. They never questioned that it's something that is actually wrong and it's actually affecting them. Not until I actually started thinking, questioning, when I saw that once girls go to the initiation camp, where they are taught different things.
How do you call it, initiation camp?
Sorry?
How do you call it? Initiation camp.
Initiation camp.
So this
it's
is the
more
place
of
where
like
the
a
women
rite
go.
of passage. Yeah. So many things happen at the camp. And one of the things that once you go there, young girls actually, they are the most important topic that they have to learn is how to sexually please a man. So once girls go to such kind of place, when they come back, they are mentally disturbed, they drop out of school, and they get married. And some of them, they actually... so usually, this culture is actually spread out from the central region in southern part of Malawi. Once a girl is towards puberty stage, could be 9 from the age of 9. So once you go there, you have to learn all those things. And one of them, in some extreme experiences, a man who is hired by the community has to go to the initiation camp and actually sleeps with the girls. And that's more of like telling them that now you're officially grown up. So some girls get pregnant at the camp. So it happened that my younger sister had to go through the initiation camp. And when she came back, she right away dropped out of school. And that's when I started thinking, what is wrong? Why do girls drop out of school once they go there? That's when I started having conversations with young girls like myself. And one thing that I knew that I wouldn't want to go there, and I was called a stubborn person, a person who is not valuing the cultural systems in my community. And later on, my sister actually dropped out of school, and later on she was found pregnant. And this was not even surprising at all, because a lot of girls, once they go through the initiation camp, they drop out of school because they have learned so many things that are beyond their age. So it is really traumatizing that girls have to go through that kind of cultural systems. And that's when I started questioning, why should girls go through that? Why should it be mandated? Why should parents allow them to go through that? And I remember one person asked me, why should the mothers send their children to the camp when they know that they have to go through all this. And it comes back, it's because they have gone through this and it's mandated and they don't question it. And as a woman, for you to be accepted in the community that you are a fully woman, you have to go through this. That's why women find it relevant that the generation has to go through this.
Actually, the marriage law changed because of your activism. It's now 18, right?
Yeah.
So can you tell us how you changed the spiritual leaders' opinion? I can imagine that it was not that easy, since culture is very deeply rooted in customs and norms. So what have you done?
Okay, when I realized that this is something that has to be stopped, I actually engaged my fellow young girls. So we created a club and we started speaking one-to-one with the traditional leaders, with the faith leaders. And for us, the most powerful tool that we used were our stories. And it comes back to where we have been talking about that, stories create changes. They bring in the type of revolution that you'd want. And stories are actually a powerful tool to start conversations. So we did build that a rapport where we engaged the traditional leaders and they were actually able to listen to us. We were able to tell them the issues that actually happen and how girls are affected. And little by little, we tried to change their perception about things. And it actually made me realize that if you start, breaking out of the shell, you start sharing your experiences, people get to understand you rather than just sitting down. And that really brought in the change and the traditional leaders in my community. It was the first traditional community to actually outlaw the child marriages. And we took the campaign at national level because already parents were coming to us like, even if you go to the court, they'll tell you that 15, your child can get married at the age of 15 with a parental consent. So we went back to look at the Constitution itself and start thinking, how do we move it and change? And then we engaged with the politicians, which was another hardest thing. And so we talked to them, we lobbied with them, and later on, I led this big campaign in my country, I'll marry when I want, which really received a massive collaboration with the, organizations, both at community and national level and international level. And it brought in the international community together, and they stood with us. And our leaders were embarrassed when we mentioned the statistics about how terrible the situation of child marriage is. And later on, the legal marriage age was changed, and I became the face of revolution against child marriages and the girl empowerment in my country.
Yeah. Memory. There is, I would say, a new generation on women fighting for change and human rights. We have climate activist Greta Thunberg. There is Carola Rakete. I don't know if you know her, the German activist and captain of the rescue ship Sea-Watch. We have Emma Gonzalez, the US-American activist for gun control. Would you say that the revolution is female?
Oh, yes. It's a big yes. It is a big yes, and women are making the history, and we are changing the narratives about who we are, and that's a very big thing that this generation is actually doing, and I love it to see that as we are being like this, and we are actually transferring it to the youngest generation, and I believe that they will even be more powerful than we are today, and that's a very big thing that we are creating that path for the younger generation. Yeah.
The revolution is female. Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't know how you feel, but I feel, how to say, I feel energized. That's a good feeling. So we pass to another point of the program. Now it's time to look beyond our planet, beyond the issues that we face every day here on Earth. I would like to introduce you to a space leader and an artist born in New Mexico City, who lived in 5 different countries and who was trained as an astronaut in Russia. He has a background in philosophy, music, and theater. He believes that space is a territory that must be occupied not only by technology and science, but also with art and culture. With his Institute Cosmica, he advocates for a more inclusive, bold, and ethical space community. Please give a warm welcome to Nahum. Thank you. Thank you. Was a good one, no? Yeah. Okay.
February 26, 1962. Dear Miss Kelly, this is in response to your letter of February 20th, 1962. Your offer to go on a space mission is commendable, and we are very grateful. But this is to advise that we have no existing program concerning women astronauts, nor do we contemplate any such plan. We appreciate your interest and support of the nation's space program. Sincerely, O.B. Lloyd Jr., Director of Public Information of NASA. The history of space exploration looks like this. Is dominated by affluent and industrialized nations that have very often tied to the economic and military imperatives. This has cemented the imperial dominance of these superpowers, reinforcing gender, racial, and colonial orders. This has left very little room for a true diverse space community. In my work, I've been trying to find ways to hack this, to, if possible, to open our space community to everyone. And I've done certain experiments to do this. For example, close your eyes. As you listen to the sound of my voice, you start drifting into a deep trance state. Soon, you will remember a memory that you have forgotten. Open your eyes. I'm not going to hypnotize you, but I have been hypnotizing people in theaters all around the world using these first words for a journey that has no restrictions. I crafted an experience that has been inserted to hundreds of people, and when they wake up, they remember something new, like, for example, walking on the moon.
I remember flying to the moon really well and landing.
أنا أتذكر أنني كنت أطير في الفضاء.
Once I got onto the moon, I started to drift off, and the boundaries between dream and memory are very fuzzy for me.
Yeah, I was alone, but the strange part is I felt like the moon was really small. Like I didn't feel like the way you would on Earth, like the way things are just flat. Like when I was sitting there, I felt like I was on a round little ball.
So I was looking at the ground and I could see this grayish-white, rocky surface.
So these people remember walking on the moon. But another way of raising these challenges and these topics is by something that I call space cultural policy making. In 2008, I was invited by the International Astronautical Federation, the Space Federation, to set up the first department for arts and culture in space. Here we advocate for the importance of having artists in space missions, and this is what it looks like, a bit better than it looked back in the 60s and 70s. In the last 10 years that I've been working in the space community, I've learned that very often the space imaginaries are elaborated as a continuation of older logics and practices of the West. And let's remember what it means to plant a flag. It doesn't matter if it's on the moon or in any other territory. It is an unmistakable sign of colonialism. And for me, it's intriguing to see how our future is envisioned in this way. Here we see two things. We see quotes about the future, but also we see quotes about colonies and colonizing and conquering. I believe that it is crucial to invent new alternatives to colonialism, exploitation, and appropriation if we're going to live in a more equitable planet and societies. This is why bringing culture and art into any sphere of human activity is extremely important. And with this idea in mind, I founded in 2011 Cosmica, which you can imagine is a space agency for all the critical, cultural, and poetic discourses of our relationship with space activities, and also to reflect on how space activities have an impact on our planet. At Cosmica, we bridge culture with the space sector and also with a wider society. We promote programs with space agencies about the importance of queer culture, feminism, but also to celebrate that we live in a wonderful universe and in a wonderful planet. So with Cosmica, we engage all different actors to bring something that I like to call the cosmic perspective. Because in this time, I have met plenty of astronauts in Russia and in the US and in Europe. And I'm fascinated by how often, when they come back to our planet, they have quotes like this. For example, Jose Hernandez, a Mexican migrant, he says that I had to leave this world to come to the conclusion that borders are a human-made concept. So how can we use the space perspective to contribute to the great challenges that we have on our planet? A few years ago, we started a program for refugees and migrant communities, both in Europe and in my motherland, Mexico, where they have to perform speculative space missions. So they go to outer space in their minds, and then they look around and they look Earth as a whole. They look Earth without these man-made constructions, without these borders, and where we try to convey this message that it doesn't matter where you are, Earth is the home of all. And something beautiful happened in one of these cosmic events, and that was a Syrian girl started to write a story that I thought it was appropriate to read to you in a book fair. And it reads something like this. I am the moon, and I have been with Earth during millions of years. I've seen it changing, continents moving, and asteroids crashing. Throughout time, I have seen some tiny beings move inside of it. Every night, they make the Earth blink in the dark, and on a peaceful day, I watched a silver object dancing around me. It landed, and from its entrails, I saw two tiny beings walking out. They jumped around and raised a flag that made me tickle. After having some fun, they flew back home. Soon after, another group of creatures came to visit me. They walked around and collected stones and dust. After a few visits, I believed I knew everything about these Earth's creatures. It was pretty simple. They all looked the same and sounded the same. One day, things changed. A new group of tiny beings came to visit me. But now they looked different from each other and spoke in different melodies that I have never heard before. Carefully, they scratched me and planted a fragile and colorful thing. It was red and full of scent. The earthly creatures call it a rose, but I call it a friend. No fire alarms, and I'm happy. So, thinking about this cosmic perspective, I've been wondering of how this can be useful for the way that we relate to each other, for the way that we relate with non-human forms, and how we can go deep into experiencing space. Last year, I tried that with the first artistic object that went to outer space. This is a project in collaboration with the European Space Agency, the Space University, and SpaceX. We launched an interactive artwork that right now, as I'm speaking here, is orbiting around our planet, and that can only be activated by people's heartbeats. It's the encounter of two presences, one on Earth and another one in space. Here is Alexander Gerst installing it. But for me, also, space is a tool to understand ourselves, to imagine the first time that we took a camera into space, we turned around and we took a picture of Earth. I believe that it helps us to make sense of this existence. And in 2014, I managed to perform a zero-gravity flight with the Russians. And something beautiful happened then. The first time that I was floating in weightlessness, it was the first time that my body and my mind were in such a strange situation. In that moment, every cell of my body became weightless. My body and nothingness were the same. I felt part of the void. And in that moment of not knowing where is up and down and not feeling that I existed, I reached out and I started hugging the other crew members. And that was the moment when I realized that we can only live if we are together. And it was a beautiful experience that we all lived on board this spaceship. So with that last reflection, I want to let you know that you are already in space. So thank you so much for your time.
Nahum, thank you so much. I was asked only a year or two ago, and so I wasn't a young boy, if there was no impediment to my life, no family restrictions, no financial restrictions, no geographical restrictions, what would I like to be? And like a sort of 7-year-old boy, I said, I'd like to be an astronaut. And I sincerely mean that. And it's not just the beauty of space and the beauty of new vistas. I think what you have shown us, or shown me, talking of myself only, is that maybe my vision of space and my motivation for space, which you won't be surprised to hear will never be realized, was born of a sort of 1970s sensibility rather than the way you have described it. So I found that incredibly moving, and thank you very much. I think we need to give Nahum another really big round of applause for that. To moderate our final panel tonight is the Vice President of the Frankfurter Buchmesse. He is the guy who founded the Arts Plus. He is the brainchild behind Create the Revolution, and he is an amazing change maker. Over to you, Holger.
Thank you, John. Yes, thank you, Nahum, for that incredibly poetic speech. It was really beautiful. Please have a seat. You're part of the panel. And we have 2 more guests. Lina Chen, can you please come up on stage? So, Lina is an Ivy League student, and you became a victim of revenge porn. You actually became probably the world's most famous victim of revenge porn. Your ex-boyfriend posted sex images of you on the web and almost drove you into madness at that time. After that, you moved to Germany. You took over, or you started taking over a new identity to get away from the horrible situation of being an online porn victim. But something had changed in your mind, I believe, and you started to turn that situation into a situation that actually helped you to become stronger and to become someone else. You became more political, you started writing about the story that happened, and you also started to use your own nakedness, to use your body as a tool of your own free will. Today, you work as an author and as an artist, and we'll start the interview right after I invited our other guest. And please welcome on stage Uglow. So, T and I met on a park bench in Austin during South by Southwest because my colleague Nikki introduced us to each other, and we spent 2 hours on that park bench, and you touched my heart during these 2 hours, and we talked about that we are going to do something together. Now we make it true. Uglow is creative director for Google's Creative Lab in Sydney. She works with cultural and with creative organizations around the world, exploring the space between technology and the arts, and what can happen where they intersect. But
T is also famous for her fluid idea of identity and of self-definition. That includes gender appearance, it includes the constant spread between the arts and technology, it contains revolutionary behavior within a huge corporation like Google. And I was always asking myself, as an experienced wanderer between identities, how much stability can we take out of a fixed identity, and how much freedom can we gain of getting rid of it?
There's a funny thing, which is that we spend an enormous amount of our time trying to achieve certainty and stability from a position of uncertainty and instability. And kind of if you embrace the uncertainty and the instability, it removes all the work that you have to do to get to the position of certainty. Our lives are very unstable things. Like our reassurances, the things that we take for granted, can flip on a dime. You can wake up, you can read a line on the internet. Horrible things can happen to you that are completely out of your control. Your life can change. And every time we try and kind of guarantee ourselves against that, we're just creating boxes, we're creating walls, we're creating sort of structures and foundations that actually inhibit us, inhibit how we experience the world, inhibit how we see the world. For me, it's not the right way round, and it's been quite an interesting exercise realizing that I was going in the wrong direction in what I was trying to do with my life, which was this idea of contorting myself into a box where I was a husband and a father, and we had a mortgage, and I played rugby, and those things, all of these normal things that I'd been taught were right, and taught were normal because they are normal, but they're only normal because they're common. That's what normal means. They're average. It does not make them better or worse. So yeah, for me, it's been a very interesting few years, moving away from the normal and trying to find ways to allow, especially in this new world order of digital and technology, finding ways of making sure that we don't omit the unknown unknowns, the bits at the edges, the things we weren't aware that we weren't taking into account. So I spend a lot of time talking about normativity, AI, inclusion, how those things are very much, to me, the flip sides of the same coin, and also culture, and how culture is a form of interpretable knowledge gets, again, lost at the edges of what a world that would like everything to be fixed and definite and certain. So, yeah, no, not a big fan of certainty.
So, you mentioned that during the last years, you went into different change processes. This might be a really stupid question, but is it more a joyful or a painful process to be in constant fluxus when it comes to your own identity?
It's neither.
Neither?
It's not a...
So I see you're completely non-binary.
Yeah, I do think that there's this very difficult move for people to move from this state where we have had binary, like ones and zeros, blacks and whites, polar opposites, into a world where we experience things not just on a spectrum, but actually on a kind of planar level. This is what we're talking about with this generation that are coming up, is much more that they understand that these forms, these structures that have been held by society are not simply not binary, they're planes. Mm-hmm. There is so much space to move within a plane of gender rather than a spectrum of gender. There is so much space to move within a plane of sexuality rather than, and then you can begin to add dimensions into that. It is a very It's a liberated and liberating space. And the only thing you have to do is realize that everything we've been told is made up by people who came before us. That's the only thing you have to realize. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic time. Whether it's joyful or painful, it's difficult. I'd rather not be sitting here espousing it. I'd rather not be sitting here talking about the things. I'm sure you'd rather not be sitting here talking about these things. I'm sure no one actually on this stage wants to do this. That's what you mean, I think, by revolution, is that we put ourselves there and we will tell you, because otherwise people don't see it.
I think it's a really beautiful picture that you gain a lot when you open up the space between binaries or different identities. Lina, at some point you decided to use the problem of being a revenge porn victim and you turned it into a tool on your behalf. How did you cope with the pain that is involved in such a situation? And what actually made you change that situation? What actually gave you the strength to leave that victim status?
Well, I would say that it was a survival mechanism. I mean, you can choose to kill yourself over something like what had happened to me, having naked photos of yourself published on the internet. And certainly there are many people who have done just that in the past 10 years since this crime was committed against me. Or you can choose to use that thing that could have killed you as a reason to keep on living. And that is what I chose to do. And the method I chose was to play with my identity. So much of what T just said really resonates with me, because immediately, following this incident, I became politicized. It made me realize that I was very naive in thinking that one could just be a sexually open and liberated and trusting woman and get away with it and not be punished for it. And I was very angry for some time until I realized, well, you know what? I was born into a world where the conditions are such. If you are out there being sexually liberated as a woman, you will probably be shamed for it. And you can be angry, and that anger is justified, or you can accept that that is an occupational hazard of being a woman and then move on with your life. And that's what I did. So I went from being someone who blogged about my sex life and wrote about my sex life to being a feminist activist, being involved in reproductive justice. And when that led to more online harassment and stalking, I decided to move to Berlin, and I became a nude model. And I started modeling naked for photographers in order to reclaim agency over my body, which had been this source of shame. And after a while, I realized that what I was doing was a form of durational performance art. And now today, I am a performance artist and just started a MFA program at Carnegie Mellon. So, in the last 10 years, I've gone through this transformation process. And I am very lucky, I am very privileged to have the access to these opportunities that have allowed me to make some meaning out of my pain, because there are plenty of people out there with equally, if not even more painful stories who don't get that same opportunity. So I want to say that this is my method, this has been my journey, but I think I've been in a uniquely special and lucky and privileged position to be able to do that for myself.
So, did you get a lot of support from your family, for example, during that process, or was that like another fight you had to?
I do not talk to my family very openly about what happened. Some of them know. I think, coming from the background that I come from, the daughter of Chinese immigrants to the US, I had to accept long ago that many of the decisions that I make in my life, they will not agree with, and just live that way anyways. And there is something very empowering as the daughter of Chinese immigrants, as a woman, period, and saying, I can be selfish, I can do this for myself.
So this is a very powerful panel here at the end. Nahum, we also heard from your speech and from the introduction that you also constantly challenge the idea of identity and challenge the idea of what is necessary to be in a situation like being an astronaut, for example. You are, with the work you do, you fight for more gender equality in space, which actually is military. You seem to like to challenge the idea that the moon and space should be something that needs to be colonized by humans. How did you manage to get hurt by all these military people? How did you manage to be hurt by people who usually have jobs that don't allow them to invite an artist and a free-thinking person like you to be their teacher?
Yeah, well, it's been over a decade that I'm engaged with this community, and it's taken a lot of time. I had to do all the different trainings and enroll to a program and do a couple of space missions, and I had to be part of this community, but always keeping my freedom. I'm not getting paid by space agencies, and I'm not in anyone's payroll. And I think some people find the power of that I can go to COPWAS, in the United Nations, where they supervise the space treaties and speak openly as an artist. And I can talk about all these issues, and I can talk from my Mexican passport and from a colonized country about these issues. And very often people in the community tell me, oh, but you are so angry. You are always talking about these things. And of course, as you said, I would like to be talking about other things, but if I have a responsibility to improve my community, because I believe that my community is about the future. So if our image of the future is distorted, then there's really not much hope. So I'm trying to check things, speak about things, and now you're an artist, and this is the incredible power of art. We are agents, and we have a huge responsibility. Of course, we would like to be talking about other things, but that doesn't mean that we have to be blind to the greatest problems that we are facing today.
Mm-hmm. So we heard in the last panel that women are the pure revolutionaries. Actually, I'm sorry, you were wrong. It's creators and artists being the real revolutionaries. So how can you... no. Of course, it's not one against the other. This is not what we're here for. How can other artists and creators learn from but also your experiences? How can art, creative ideas reach out to audiences and create something new to audiences that usually don't listen to creatives because that's not part of their job? So, Nahum, maybe.
Okay. Well, I think, there was this question before, if art is about just reflecting society or not. I believe that we have to work inside our communities. It happens that my community is astronauts and military people and all that, so it's not enough for me to use that technology to make an artwork, but to work with them. And most of my work happens between closed doors, and it's not public, but I have a responsibility with this community. So my advice is get close, get hands-on, involved with your communities, whatever they are. And I think we have the same topics that are really, really important today, and that in all sorts of communities we need to be talking about these issues.
Lina, we talked about what you did as an artist, but do you have the feeling that you manage to change media culture with what you did, or do you have? Did you receive a lot of messages from people saying that you were empowering to do the same, actually, like you did? Do you feel like a role model?
It's a difficult question to answer because I feel like I and many survivors of trauma or violence are often put on a pedestal, and that's a huge burden for survivors to shoulder. You know, some of us have the privilege and resilience to be that role model. Many people do not. And yeah, for every Nita Hill or Dr. Ford, there's going to be someone else who does not feel like they can come forward with their story, but their pain is also valid. So I think, much like what Narun is saying, we need community engagement. We need to democratize art. We need to make it accessible to people who do not have the title of artist on their business card. Social practice is a huge part of the art I do. So I have a project right now called Heal Her, which works with artistic facilitators and activists and therapists and healers to convene storytelling circles for survivors of sexual violence. And we use expressive art therapy, ranging from psychodrama and breath work and voice work to the visual arts and creative writing. And we use these tools as outlets for normal, regular people who will never sit on a stage like this to tell their stories to each other and to find a way to do so in a safe, supportive setting where they are both the storytellers and the witnesses to other people's stories of trauma. And I think when you use the arts in such a way where it's not about having a piece of work in an exhibition or in a film festival, when you just show regular people that art can be a vehicle for healing, they too can they too can undergo that transformation process that I underwent. And it's important that we have these platforms because I think right now in the age of Me Too, we have so much emphasis on telling these stories very publicly, using social media, all of which is important because we need to have a public discourse. But we also have to understand that victims and survivors do not owe anyone else their story. So I think that's where the arts have to head. We have to use arts as a tool for communities that don't normally think of the arts as accessible to them and don't realize the transformative healing potential that it can bring.
So art can help us to be out and loud in this case. T, speaking about out and loud and openness, you are face blind. Which many people would see as a weakness.
I thought you were plugging my book. That's so sweet of you. No, I thought you were plugging my book.
No.
I have a book coming out in May called Loud and Proud, which is about a history of queer speeches, about the people that have stepped forward. I mean, I'm hoping that the Germans will at some point reclaim the fact that they not only invented the word homosexual, but were like the pioneers of homosexual rights for 50 years before the Americans had seemed to have heard of this, and 100 years before the Americans invented gay rights. But yes, I'm sorry. Yeah. I mean, I'm very interested in this.
It's absolutely okay to self-promote a book that has not been published yet. So after
but the stories have. Like that's not.
No. But I wanted to address something else. Your face blindness.
I am, yes.
You are face blind, and many people, I guess, would see that as a weakness that needs to be covered or hidden or whatever. But you're very open with it. You tell it right away. After our first meeting, you said that was a lovely time we spent together. But be prepared. The next time we see each other, I won't recognize you because I'm face blind. How important do you think is it to have more openness about who you are and what makes you special and how can help us more openness to change something?
I have a document that's attached to my email which covers the things that I really don't want to have to run through about myself. but that are kind of like problematic, like the fact that I don't recognize people, that I rock, that I click my fingers, and that that I have an array of mental health conditions, several of which are trauma-related. I don't really want to have to try and explain that I'm okay. It's not important to me. And I think would be very useful if people were more aware, if that sort of personal disclosure was just a natural part of our lives. So yeah, I'm very happy with disclosing, partly because it just means that I don't have to explain. Or rather, people won't misunderstand me when I don't recognize them. I'm very good at recognizing when people recognize me. That's generally how I work. And then, you can work out who it is eventually. These things, I have a more significant mental health condition, PTSD, which is kind of like complex PTSD, and dissociative identity disorder, which is what people would have understood as multiple personality disorder, but we've stopped calling it multiple personality disorder because it's very stigmatized. Because if I say that to you, then you basically assume that one of us is an axe murderer. One of me is an axe murderer, because you've had no other stories. And I think it's really important, since we're going to talk about culture, and since someone's already mentioned this, that, although from the other perspective, that when we talk about appropriating voices, when we talk about writing, when we talk about how wonderful that is, we also create stories which put minorities in boxes which they then have to fight for decades to escape from. Autism being a very clear example. It is not just the scientists, it's not just the politicians. Culture is just as much to blame for creating the boxes that we seem to think that we are empowered to destroy, to resolve. And we must walk carefully when we do that, as artists, as writers, as musicians, as theatre makers. It's a very difficult task. So I like talking about it because it helps. And I get more than 280 characters. And yet when we try and reduce this down to 280 characters, which is unbelievably turning into like the default mode of communication, we somehow are surprised that this broad plane of potential becomes binary and polar again, and we are fighting each other. So yeah, I will always talk. I'll talk and talk, and I'll stand up because I'm privileged and I have that right. I think I loved your point about choosing not to die. Like, it's very hard for people to hear that, but that's what happens. You actually choose not to die, because actually that would have been a lot easier. It would have really been a lot easier, and I think that would have worked for me personally, probably worked out much better. Like, I like that it worked out for other people. But it's not trivial, the stuff we're talking about.
Guys, thank you so much for your openness in this last panel. We invited identity challengers to this panel to show you how much you can gain when you are open about things, when you also lose or develop a new idea of your own identity, and develop probably also your personal culture or your personal revolution about what we always thought was your culture. Thank you very much for your openness, and thank you very much for being with us. T, Lina, and Nahum. Thank you. Can we borrow one of your mics?
What an evening, what to say at the end. I personally feel empowered. I feel much better than this morning. And I know that this evening I will go to bed with an optimistic feeling. Change is possible. What we need is to overcome indifference, and apathy. Culture can change things. We saw this with Phyllis Omido, with Memory Banda, even with Richard Kando. And I think what to say, I mean, we heard so fascinating talks, we had so fascinating guests and activists. I just have to say, let's be bold and let's be loud.
Great. John, what is your takeaway from that evening?
They always say the test of a really great event or some form of intervention is the question, tell me something I don't know already. And I didn't know pretty much everything that came tonight. I was not just empowered, I was challenged at so many steps of this evening, and I have learnt a huge amount. I think that this Create Your Revolution strand, I hope, I trust, is going to grow, and it's going to become ever more embedded in what Arts Plus and the Frankfurt Book Fair do, because Holger and colleagues, I think you're onto something, and congratulations for choreographing such a great event.
Thank you. And of course, we also thank you all for staying with us, because I think the best things always happen in the end. Not to say that the beginning wasn't also extremely great. Please take our claim seriously. Yeah? Please create your own revolution, because there's not one revolution, there are many revolutions, and you all are revolutionaries, as we heard. Be open about yourself, start your own revolution, create it. Thank you very much.
Es war doch eine schöne Runde, oder? Ja. Well done.